So this can actually be PCIe Direct Connect if you want. You can take this box and you can get the same speed as a PCIe card. So if your application requirements are for the crazy latency speeds that PCIe cards gives you, these arrays can be PCIe Direct connected in. Or you can put fiber channel cards or InfiniBand cards in the back of them, and then, or iSCSI, FCOE, whatever you want, and then share them as if they're normal SAM. It was designed to be an enterprise class SAM. It never goes down. It's always available. So this brings 64 different internal chips spread out over 12 different RAID groups, each RAID group having 5 different DIMM chips, which are kind of somewhat analogous to an SSD in them. So we parallelize everything over every chip every time, so you end up with a giant block device that is screaming fast, and there's just, you can create as many LUNs as you want, or you can create as few LUNs as you want. Everything's spread out over everything every single time. So an all-flash array is going to give you a rack-mountable experience. It's going to consolidate and give you somewhere between at this point, 2 and 20 terabytes of deployable space. And it's going to give you all the speed of flash and mitigate a lot of the issues. The write clip we discussed a little bit earlier with the garbage collection taking 30x slower than a read or a write. I'll show you later how we've kind of gotten around that. So this is going to continue along at speed 24/7 versus some of the other models we're going to have to worry about at some point. Writing to it too much could hurt your performance. So moving on, I need to. Okay. So data center trends. What's going on currently in a modern data center? So data centers are slowly getting out of space, out of power, out of cooling. I've noticed in the field that cooling is actually one of the more common issues. Surprisingly, space is sometimes tends to be considered power. But something that tends to be considered cooling is one of those things that, well, once you run out, what are you going to do? Putting in more HVAC can be an extremely expensive and difficult chore. But data centers, it's expensive to create a whole new data center. And data centers are starting to fill up. And sometimes you can see in some places storage can take up over 2/3 of the actual rack space that's deployed because of the density issue. In order to drive enough IOPS, you have to buy enough spindles, and that can end up creating an environment where you have more space deployed in a storage tier than you have space deployed in a compute tier or anything else. So data center trends, everything is, we're running out of power, we're running out of space, we're running out of cooling. We need to reduce costs. We're in the middle of a recession. Everybody wants to cut costs, which means licensing, which means power, space, any way you can do it. There's a bunch of green initiatives out there. People want to do things better and faster, but they also want to do them in a more green way and reduce their carbon footprint. And 24/7 is now the new standard. I was VBA in the mid-90s where HA was getting a server back up today. Nowadays, it's textbook standard. Everybody has to be on 24/7. Nobody can ever have anything off ever. That's just table stakes to be a part of a data center nowadays. So how do you reduce costs, and how do you go green when you're running out of power and space, and how do you keep your uptime when sometimes that requires moving data around, doing mirroring, doing replication, which requires multiple boxes, and latency can cause issues with doing async versus sync mirroring, and how do you grow but not grow? How do you grow but shrink all at the same time? So that's where Flash can really help out. Flash can come into the data center and take that largest footprint, which is your storage, and drop 90% less, up to, I've seen greater than 90% less space used by deploying Flash as your storage tier versus hard drive, 90% less power, 90% less cooling and HVAC. So you can go into a data center and you can revolutionize it by ripping out or augmenting, depending on your deployment strategy. You can eliminate 90% of your space consumption, 90% of your power, 90% of your HVAC. It makes things much cheaper, much smaller, much easier to configure, much easier to maintain. And once you've gone from having 5 or 6 racks of storage down to 1 or 2, 3 arrays, you need less fiber channel switches, InfiniBand switches, console ports, KVM switches, all the things that you use both physically, as far as like switches and cables, but also from a licensing standpoint. All those things that manage everything goes from being at a very large scale to a very small scale. So your administration is a lot easier. It's a lot less complex. There's fewer parts that exist inside a data center, and they're smaller, and they're faster, and more dense. They take less power, less HVAC. So you can go into an environment where it has 4, 5, or 6 full rows of storage and plop in a handful, 3 boxes. And not only have you eliminated multiple rows full of storage, you've actually made things run faster. So you can go to a data center and eliminate your space concerns or your power concerns quite easily. This is an example where we deployed where they had 2 full aisles. On the left, you can see that the 2 kind of white stripes left to right, they had 2 full aisles of storage that were running their data, stored everything for the data center. And on the right, we plopped in 4 arrays. And for what looks to be about a quarter to a third of 1 rack is replacing and performing better than what used to take up 2 full aisles of disk storage. So this is a very common theme. You can actually see the clear hanging plastic. They no longer want to cool this portion of the data center, so they went to a butcher supply store and bought the hanging plastic that you use in walk-in freezers so they could actually isolate it apart and they no longer have to cool it anymore. Kind of a fun story to tell. So what about databases? What is Flash actually going to do for databases? Well, let's look at database trends. What's happening recently? So more data, right? Nobody's ever deleting. There's more users, there's more applications. People don't want their data archived out. They want it always on, always available. Back in the old days, we used to, if the data was over a year, we'd archive out or something like that. And if somebody needed it, then we'd go get it for them. Nowadays, I have clients that have literally never deleted anything ever because that's the way data works nowadays. Everybody wants the ability to do everything every time. So you have more users, more applications, and your data's, in some cases, not dying or has to live much longer. And now you have many more departments using things, accounting, sales, marketing. They may be hitting data. You might have many more uses of data than you had before in the past. There's a bit of a BI explosion going on right now. Microsoft SQL Server 2012, one of the huge offerings of that is BI integration. So what's fueling is, I was a reporting specialist back in the 90s and early 2000s, and reports were for executives.